She told it from a chair in the corner of the room. Her voice was small and plain. No frills, no flourish. Just the bare bones. She promised to keep to the essentials. We agreed to listen. Years before, she had been curious about ghosts. Not from books, from cold bricks and dim hallways. She found a cheap lodging on Grove Lane. A thin place, people said. A woman had died there, the story went. Or so the caretaker claimed. She had gone by herself to sit the night, to test the truth. She had made the short inspection in daylight. She had the caretaker's key in her pocket. She had the small lamp and a notebook. She meant to be alone. She meant to observe. At 11, someone waited on the steps. A man she took for the caretaker. She did not want company, but she let him inside. He shuffled after her up the stair. He said he only wanted to show the room. She let him. She struck a match and sat in a faded armchair. Then she looked at him properly, and her heart jumped. He was not the man she had met that afternoon. He was younger, clean-cut. He had a face full of tired sorrow. She had a sharp, practical mind, but in that instant her courage slid away. She was a woman alone in a dim house. Her hands went cold. "Who are you?" she asked. She said the name of the caretaker. He only smiled sadly. "I am the man who was frightened to death," he said. The words cut like a cold blade. She thought first of silly things, things that have nothing to do with danger. Her notebook, her pencil, cigarettes in her pocket, her brother-in-law's opinion. Then the ordinary stuff faded. Fear arrived. He said it again, "And I am frightened now." She felt a tightness in her chest. She rose to her feet, steadying herself. She thought him some rogue or madman. Her plan was simple. Humor him. Get to the door, run. He moved toward her slowly. He had a voice that seemed to come from inside her. Low, worn, strange. "You are not Carrie," she repeated. She watched him. He watched her back. His eyes were terrible and soft. "No," he said. "I am frightened still. I am not in the flesh." The silence outside the house deepened. The city was dark. Dust lay on the stair. She felt small and foolish. She felt like someone who had climbed a cliff and then looked down. She ran. She took the wrong flight of stairs and tumbled. Her skirt tore. She slammed into a room and found another man there, a shadow by the window. Her panic became something else. A soul-sick fear pressed under her ribs. This other figure did not step forward. He stayed by the glass, outlined by the street lamp. She knew at once who he was. He belonged to the house in a different way. He explained it with a voice that seemed not to belong to his mouth. He said, "I live in different space. I am all over this house. I cannot escape. I want my condition changed. I want sympathy. No, affection. Love." His plea was simple and terrible. Strangely, her fear melted with it. She stood shaking and listened. He told her how he had been a misanthrope in life, how anger and dread had filled him, how the last great fright had stopped his heart, how that night had become a prison. If only someone would not tremble, he said. If only someone would be kind, laugh softly, cry, pity, love, then I might be able to change. She felt something loosen in her chest. Tears came unbidden. She moved toward him. She could not explain it to herself later. Pity. A strange courage. A wild, generous pity. "Kiss me," he begged. "Put your arms round me. Forget that I am a man and you a woman. Forget that I am dead.
Love me, and I shall be free." He knelt at her feet then. There was a softness about his face that was like light. He seemed smaller and more terrible at the same time. He reached toward her. She stepped forward. She said the words aloud. "I love you. I am not afraid." Her voice cracked. Her hands were shaking. She folded him to her. She kissed him again and again. She held something that was not solid. She described it as both cool wind and burning fire. There was a rush through her limbs, a bright shock of wonder and pain. Then he was gone. The room was empty. The weight had left the air. She struck a match to prove it. She went through the house, cellar and attic, kitchen and corridors. The rooms were bare at last. The thing that had lived there had gone somewhere else. She slept the rest of the night in her own flat. She locked the door behind her. Later, her uncle summoned her. He owned the house. He wanted an account of the night. He did not ask for ghosts. He told her instead that he had invented the murder story. He thought people's imaginations did the work for them. So he told a different tale to the curious. He had suggested the idea of a murdered woman to test them. The truth, he said, was slighter and sadder. A cousin of his had been ill in that house. Mad, anxious, ill with some inward terror. He had killed himself years before in a night of panic. It was that figure people had seen. She did not correct him. She kept her knowledge close. She had felt the thing kneel at her feet. She had given it pity and a kiss. She had believed she was helping a man find peace. But the uncle's confession changed nothing. It only made the ache sharper. He had been a frightened soul, alive or dead. And now she knew the cost of kindness. Sometimes, when the street is still and the lamps are low, she thinks of the glow that rose around his face. She remembers the way his voice asked for love. She remembers her own hands. She remembers the sudden lightness after the kiss. She remembers the hush. She never told the small, private truth to anyone who asked for the essentials. She kept it for herself. And sometimes, in the quiet, she wonders whether love always frees, or whether love sometimes carries part of the fear with it. She cannot say, but she remembers the night and the man who was frightened to death.
When the wounded officer arrived at the isolated house above the ravine, he expected rest, not a slow unraveling of himself. The doctor had sent him there for clean air and quiet, a temporary refuge owned by a once noble family, now rotting in their own decline. The cart driver, Felipe, was the first warning. The boy looked strong and agile, but his mind drifted like smoke. He talked in broken, excited bursts, then fell into sudden silences, as if listening to voices the officer couldn't hear. Fear stirred in him whenever the wild river echoed through the mountain gorge. He was a man in shape, a child in thought, and something feral in instinct. The house matched its inhabitants: cold stone walls, shuttered windows, dust coating every forgotten corner. Portraits of ancestors stared from the walls with the same golden eyes Felipe had. Especially one portrait, a woman with red hair and a face both beautiful and cruel. Her expression followed him like a warning. Inside the courtyard lay the mother, the Signora, beautiful in a sleepy, heavy way. Her eyes were golden too, wide and unfocused, sliding past meaning. She spent her days lounging near the fire or sunning herself like an animal warmed by light. Her presence soothed and unsettled him at the same time. She never moved quickly, never seemed fully aware of herself. Her voice was thick, her words simple, her gaze vacant. He saw no one else, not for days. Only Felipe, with his bursts of laughter, sudden rage, and clinging affection. The boy tried so hard to please him, but flashes of something animal broke out when he was offended. And always, beneath every gesture, there was that eerie resemblance to the portrait. Then came the night of the black wind. The house groaned, the shutters hammered, dust stormed down the chimneys. Even the calm Signora paced like a restless beast. Felipe trembled and muttered that the wind made people do things. Later, in the dead of night, the officer woke to screams, rage, pain, something not quite human. He ran to the door, but it was locked from outside. The screams rose, broke, turned into snarls. He stood frozen, knowing whatever was happening, it was inside that house, and it wasn't meant for him to see. The next morning everything was calm, Felipe cheerful, the Signora sunning herself as always, and yet the officer couldn't erase the memory of those cries. He wandered the house when no one watched. Dust, portraits, silence, until he found a room that was not abandoned. Books in Latin, pages with rough poems, signs of a careful, isolated mind. A mind that did not match Felipe or the Signora. This was the daughter's room. He felt guilty for entering, but more than guilt, he felt curiosity. Who was she in this broken house? He didn't wait long for the answer. One day, turning a corner of the gallery, he nearly collided with her, the daughter, the girl he had imagined only through her handwriting and her books. She stood in the shade, a living flame, slender, bright, eyes like deep wells of thought and sadness. Her presence struck him silent. Their eyes met, held, and in that moment they felt something wordless pass between them, something that bound them before either spoke a single word. He fell into a quiet obsession. He waited for her on the gallery, watched for glimpses. Her beauty and the loneliness in her eyes burned holes in him. But she avoided him, slipping away like a hunted thing. When she finally spoke to him, it was by the cliffs overlooking the valley. Her voice was rich and steady, so unlike her family. And her first words cut him in half. "You must leave this place." He refused. He confessed everything, his love, his longing, his desire to free her from the house that weighed on her like a curse. For a moment she believed him. She stepped forward, her body trembling, and let herself fall into his arms. The earth seemed to drop beneath them. But then she tore herself away and fled among the trees. He returned to the house, burning with hope. The hope died when he cut his wrist on a window pane and went to the Signora for help. The mother lifted her head, pupils shrinking to points. Something awoke in her, something ancient and starving. Without warning, she seized his hand and bit deep into the flesh, ripping skin, drawing blood with animal hunger. Her strength was monstrous. Her cries were the same he had heard on the night of the storm. Felipe and the daughter rushed in. Felipe dragged his mother back like a writhing beast. The daughter carried the bleeding officer upstairs, locked the door, and stayed beside him for hours, tending him, praying over him, holding his hand to her chest as if trying to protect him from her own bloodline. When he finally whispered that he loved her, she broke. That night she told him everything. Their family had once been noble, strong, and brilliant, but then something began to rot inside the bloodline. Mind slipping,
instincts twisting into something half animal. Beauty remained. Everything else decayed. The mother was nearly gone. Felipe was slipping. She stood on the last ledge before the same fall, terrified she would lose herself next. And she refused to pass that curse to another life. You love me, but you love a face that belonged to women dead for hundreds of years. My hands, my voice, my eyes, they are borrowed, and that blood, you have seen what it does. She begged him to leave, for his sake, for hers, for the sake of whatever soul she still believed she had. By morning, Felipe carried him away in a cart. The officer looked back at the house, its windows glowing faintly in the dawn, her windows, and lost them at last when the road dipped into the valley. He lived. She remained behind in the mountains, bound to a fate she believed she could not escape, choosing to protect him from the darkness in her blood by letting him go. And that was her tragedy, and his. A love too powerful to deny, and too dangerous to survive.
Tomas Reed found the book in a drawer behind the false bottom of a dressing case. It was thin. The pages were blank except where a single hand had filled them. He read it over and over. He read it at night with a lamp close, afraid of losing a single sentence. He tells this plainly at first. He is a careful man. He has copied the pages out by hand. He says the handwriting belongs to a woman. He calls her only she. He tells the reader, politely, that she gave him no names. He leaves out the place where he found the drawer. He keeps that to himself. The book begins like a conversation. It begins with small things, a name of a street, a smell, a cup left in the sink. She writes as if she is catching moments on the wing. She writes of seeing and of feeling. She writes of a voice that taught her to listen. At first, the voice she writes about is soft and loving. It is the voice of a man she met on a bridge, on a plain evening when the light looked like water. He introduced himself as Robert Hall. He liked small jokes and black coffee. He knew the exact hours of the trains. She loved the way he folded his hands when he waited for people to speak. Their courtship is simple in the book. They meet in a market. He brings her a strange fruit. They walk along a river that smells of iron. He tells her stories about a house he grew up in, an old place on the edge of town where the floorboards moaned like broken promises. She likes the promises. She writes about them with a clear, unashamed hunger. He notices her in public. He writes letters to her on scraps of paper. They build a room inside each other's lives. Tomas reads this like a man watching someone else fall in love. He marks the tender lines. He underlines the small betrayals. The first strange thing appears as a shadow in a photograph. She writes that the photograph was taken one summer afternoon. They stood close, smiling. Behind them, in the doorway of the house he said he had left, there is a thin, dark figure. Not a person exactly, more like a bruise in the air. She writes about the bruise for pages. She tries to find an explanation. She tells herself it is a trick of the light. She tells herself it is a stain on the paper. Then objects begin to move in their flat. A cup would be found on the floor. A key would appear under a pillow. At first they laugh. They think it is the cat. But they have no cat. The voice in the book changes when midnight comes. Words become shorter. Sentences breathe faster. She writes that he started to wake up with smudges on his hands. He would stare at the ceiling for long minutes. He would tell her, in a voice that did not belong to him, that the house was remembering. He said the house kept things. He said the house wanted to be remembered. She believes him too much.
She believes him when he says he can make the house speak. She believes him when he shows her a door in the cellar she had never known existed. The door is small. It is nailed shut with old screws. He pries it open with an old screwdriver. They descend and find a single cot and a thin mattress. The walls smell of something old and clean. In the corner, there is a stack of notebooks. She reads them one night by the dim light of a candle. They are written in a hand not unlike her lover's. They are full of lists, names, dates, little folded maps of small rooms. She is careful at first. She copies nothing. She tells herself she will understand them later. The notebooks change how she sees him. She sees his laughter as a kind of armor. She sees a man who can tidy silence into neat piles. She also reads a phrase again and again. It remembers the living like they are things. After that line, she cannot sleep. She hears a fingernail scratch at the wood in the middle of the night. She wakes with the taste of iron. She begins to dream of the thin bruise in the photograph moving. She tells Tomas this with clear, raw sentences. She writes that she loved him because he made her feel seen. She writes that she feared him because he knew how to keep the past. The horror becomes personal. She writes that he will sometimes disappear for hours. When he returns, his eyes are hollow in the exact place in which his smiles used to be. He brings with him small tokens, a child's shoe, a spoon, a button. He says he found them in the house. He says the house hides memories in its bones. She writes quietly that she thought the tokens were proof he was right. She thought the house needed to be given back its things. She thought that was how to make it stop. At the center of the book is a passage that reads like an argument. It lasts 3 pages. She writes in short, jagged lines. She accuses him of listening to other people's grief. He answers by repeating the names he has found in the notebooks. He calls them small debts. He tells her that some debts go unpaid unless someone remembers them. The next morning, she writes that a neighbor's child vanished. They reported that the child was last seen at dusk playing near the river. The police asked questions. He had no alibi. She writes that she defended him at first. She wrote down his lies and polished them until they shone. She reduces the lie to a single sentence. She says she learned the shape of excuses as well as she learned the shape of his hands. She says she let herself be convinced because love had telescoped into fear. She says fear is a slow thing that eats many small courtesies. One night, there is an earthquake inside their rooms. Glass shakes, a portrait falls. When the dust clears, the thin bruise is no longer in the photograph. In the doorway stands a child. Not a child, exactly. More like a memory shaped into a small body. She writes that she screamed. The man caught her by the wrist and shouted over her. He said the house had given him back what it had kept. He said they must leave the things in the house, leave them to sleep. She writes with a voice that trembles that he walked the child to the river. She writes that she followed, and that when she reached the bank, she found only a shoe on the stones. His hands were empty. His face was empty too. After that, the sentences in the book become slow and careful. She writes that she tried to leave him. She writes that every time she packed a bag, something small would vanish from the flat. It was as if the house wouldn't allow her to take the story away. She writes that she tried to speak to other people about it. They would nod at her politely and then look away. The last pages are the hardest to read. She writes that on a morning of rain, he slept and did not wake. She writes that she laid her hand on his chest and found at the place where his heart had been a hole like a knot pulled clean out of cloth. She writes that she cried until she had no more tears. She does not tell if he died or if the house took him. She only writes the next morning she found all the notebooks gone. She writes that the thin shoe was on the windowsill, as if a child had placed it there to be seen. She writes that the bruise in the photograph had become a stain on her memory. Her final lines are small and precise. She writes that she burned what she could burn. She writes that she copied what she could copy. She writes that she left the door to the cellar open and slid the thin book into the false drawer so that someone might someday read it and know. Tomas closes the book and holds his lamp higher. He is honest about his duty to the world. He says these pages would be striking to any reader. He says he doubts he should publish them. He says the woman left no names. She left only the floor of her own life. Tomas gives the reader the book. He leaves her the floor. He does not tell us what he will do next. He only asks us to listen, slowly, like someone learning the shape of a bruise.